During the 5.3 special program, Hoyo teased the characters that will be released throughout the remainder of version 5. Aside from the depressing realization that only 2 of the 7 ostensibly appeared to be male, players were quick to find out which of the silhouettes would be who. Some of them were fairly obvious given we knew of their identities and characteristics a while back. There is Yan-san, the one holding the dumbbell, which you can tell by the skull shape on her head. Skirk's in the middle, very easy one, she's got that hairpin to the left side of her and the detail on her shoes. Mizuki came out just recently and she's the main one to the right of Skirk. And for the remaining ones we can infer who they are based on leaks, but there's one character who caught the attention of several people, not just because there was a bit of confusion on whether said character was a boy or a girl, but more importantly, which region they belong to. Longtime players of Genshin Impact probably noticed at some point over the past few years that even though Hoyo primarily focuses on releasing characters belonging to whatever nation we're currently on in the story, presently being Netland, every so often they return to one of the older regions to bring us a new character, all except for one, Mondstadt. Mondstadt has progressively become more and more irrelevant, not just in the Genshin continuity, but also in the metagame. The last time the land of Animo was given any semblance of spotlight was the Windbloom Festival back in version 3.5 almost 2 full years ago. In terms of new releases, we haven't gotten a new major unit since 1.5 almost 4 years ago, with Eula being the latest Mondstadt native 5-star to date. I want to talk about that for today. What happened to Mondstadt, and why has the game gone so long without releasing any new characters? On the subject of needing something new for an existing thing, while we wait for Hoyo to make more Mondstadt characters, there's something else that's also getting a new thing. How many of you guys know Once Human on Steam, that post-apocalyptic survival game? Well, they're releasing a mobile version creatively titled Once Human Mobile, and they're starting their pre-registration campaign. Once Human Mobile is the most anticipated open-world mobile game coming this April that's completely free-to-play, as in not pay-to-win whatsoever, no whaling required to enjoy the full game and everything it has to offer. Set in the same type of environment as the original game, it's a post-apocalyptic Lovecraftian horror-themed world with a focus on exploration, questing, completing puzzles, gearing up, building a base, doing events, and battling all sorts of freaky monsters. When I say freaky, I really mean it. Some of their designs include a walking bus. There's even a bit of Pokemon-themed activity here where you can capture and raise these creatures called deviations, which can aid you in battle or resource production. The game is meant to be enjoyed however you'd like, giving a ton of freedom in how you want to go about it both in single and multiplayer. On that note, they're actually doing a mobile ultimate test where you can take part in cross-platform play between February 28th and March 30th, just before the official launch. So if you want to check it out, be sure to use the link on screen or in the description below, and you'll get a ton of rewards like exclusive cosmetics and enter a raffle for even more stuff. Thanks again to Star Studio for sponsoring the video, but for now, back to Mondstadt. To start, though it hasn't been officially confirmed as far as I'm aware, rumors have been circulating across discussion boards that the character to the right of Yan-san may be the identity of Dahlia, a deacon from the Church of Avonius, who was mentioned by both Barbara and Rosaria on separate occasions. I can't really say much else beyond that cause leaks, but you guys can do your own digging if you're interested. If the unit in question is confirmed to be Dahlia, then that would make him the first 5-star character to be released from Mondstadt in potentially 4 years. That is assuming he is a 5-star and he comes out sometime during spring. Liyue and Inazuma, despite also having a few years under their belts, still continuously receive new releases on a routine basis. In version 3 we had Yao and Baitu, while Inazuma got Kirara. To be fair, in version 3.5 we got Mika, who does indeed belong to Mondstadt, and just so happens to coincide with the Windbloom event that same update. But many people forget he even exists, and still believe that Eula is the last character to represent that region. I suppose it might be as a result of her being the last 5-star character, and players tend to give more attention to the golden units over the purple ones. But in any case, version 4 saw Gaming and Shenyun introduced to us during a revisit to Liyue, meanwhile Sethos came out for Sumeru. I don't count Chiori as an Inazuma unit for the same reason I don't count Toma as the Mondstadt one. They don't presently reside there. But then in version 5.3 we got Lanyan for Liyue and Mizuki for Inazuma in 5.4. Now, even if we were to acknowledge Mika, it still doesn't change the fact that Mondstadt is inarguably the least updated region of Teyvat, having not received a single high-profile character in nearly 4 years. But why? Most of what I'm about to say is purely based on conjecture, so please take it as such, but I have 3 possible reasons for why Hoyo doesn't care to invest much attention into Mondstadt. First of which being the lack of any meaningful incentive to expand on its lore, with my hypothesis being that they want to keep it as simple as possible. Mondstadt's the first area we explore, and is admittedly the most boilerplate. The landscape is characterized by green fields, moderate vegetation, and a vast span of hills, valleys, and mountain areas around the center. Though aesthetically congruent and nice to look at, it's admittedly the most mild of all the regions, intentionally so. This is exactly the kind of place you'd expect from a game starting area. A quaint yet unremarkable place meant to introduce you to Genshin Impact and the distinct absence of any striking features or landmarks. Though we do have Dragonspine and Stormterror's Lair, by and large the nation is characterized by its lack of characteristics. Not in a bad way, mind you. I often see the question, if you were in Teyvat, where would you live in? And many would choose Mondstadt for its peaceful and carefree atmosphere, as well as temperate landscape and climate. Meanwhile, the other regions, Liyue, Inazuma, Sumeru, Fontaine, and Nanlan, not only contain a more dynamic arrangement of biomes and ecosystems, but they were also designed to be a whole lot bigger in scope, spanning a larger area on the map and having world-building elements that lead to more areas, notably underground, and Kanomiya for Inazuma, the chasm for Liyue, Sumeru's desert region, and Fontaine's vast waters. You can put a lot more lore and whatnot within those areas, more specifically because they're not the first place you check out. Across the however many thousands of RPGs throughout time, you'd be hard-pressed to find one where the starting town's anything beyond just that, a starting town. Things only begin to get more expansive and convoluted once you make your way through the game and go from one region to the next. The motive for this is to ease the player into the game. Much like how, for example, the MCU began with individual standalone movies that didn't build into a multi-story saga spanning dozens of films and universes, games adhere to that same note by having the first area be as rudimentary as possible. If you started Genshin Impact in Nanlan or Fontaine or Sumeru or even Inazuma, you'd likely be extremely confused and some might feel overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information and lore they'd have to explore. Comparatively, at least in my memory, Genshin was a lot more digestible back when it was just Mondstadt and a bit of Liyue. From a game design point of view, it makes perfect sense to keep Mondstadt as just that. Expanding it to have the same level of complexity as the other regions can result in needless exposition dumping and information overload. Don't take my word for it, we have Eurula 6 and Honkai Star Rail being the most one-note region compared to the skyships of the Xianzhou or the mine factory that is Penacony. But what does region complexity have to do with new characters? Can't they still release new units? They absolutely can, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. But again, this is one possible explanation for why they don't. Most new units that get released are done so with at least the intent to have plot-related significance. For example, when Yelan was released in 2.7, she was sent to investigate the chasm with us alongside Ito, Shao, and Shinobu. Wander's release in 3.3 was not only integral to rounding out Nahida's story, but also his own, since we all wanted to know what happened to Scaramouche. Yao, Baiju, and Kirara were mostly for functionality, fleshing out the Dendro roster. Most units that come out in older regions are meant to serve a purpose or tie up a loose end, Cloud Retainer being playable as Shinyun for example. I'm making this video before Mizuki comes out, but I can imagine they'll make an effort to expand more on Inazuma, or maybe intertwine the land more with the rest of the world, seeing as Mizuki was shown to make appointments with clients from other nations. Of course, an argument can be made that Mondstadt can very much do the same thing. I for one very much enjoyed the side arc we had for Dragonspine and Albedo. It was one of my favorite events of all time and delved more into the history of the Land of Freedom. Further, I liked that Hoyo made a part 2. Funnily enough, Mondstadt is I think the only region in Teyvat to get part 2s for their events, Dragonspine and the Golden Apple Archipelago. From what I can recall, we never got a part 2 for any other place, never a reason to return to Enkanomiya or the Chasm or any other place in Sumeru. Unless of course you want to count festivals as part 2s and 3s. Hoyo could always add more Mondstadt characters for the purpose of maybe helping us check out more of, I don't know, Musgrave or Stormterror's Lair, but expanding more on Mondstadt's lore as much as I wish they would in light of the sheer amount of source material we have, would have the inevitable consequence of increasing the complexity of the starter region. Again, it's just a possible explanation for why they haven't. Second theory, and probably the one most people would point to, is that being the oldest and least remarkable area of Teyvat, marketability-wise, Hoyo doesn't have a whole lot to lean on. The reason they continuously make new Liyue units is because MiHoYo is first and foremost a Chinese company with a huge East Asian demographic. Lunar New Year is a huge deal within Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and Taiwanese culture. Naturally, this gives Hoyo a consistent bedrock to release more characters during that time. And prior to Nanlan, Liyue was effectively viewed as the most significant region in Teyvat, being the intersecting point between three regions, Inazuma, Sumeru, and Mondstadt. Inazuma, well, that's an easy one. Being based on real Japan and Japanese lore along with Japanese culture, it's a hotbed for men and women of the finest culture. Considering a major facet of Japanese folklore is the yokai, they can make tons of characters based on them. Topically, Mizuki is a tapir yokai who consumes nightmares based on the Baku creature. As a side note, Chinese culture has their own supernatural folklore as well, so there's a lot to build on there for the two regions. Admittedly, I'm not too studied on the South Asian culture and Middle East culture, but in Sumeru's defense, it's still a fairly young region. As such, they likely stand a better chance at releasing commercially successful units than Mondstadt. Though Mondstadt does have a rich culture depicting Germany, like I mentioned before, it was intentionally designed to be a chill, relaxing, and uneventful region. Not only that, but I'm willing to bet money that for most players, it's the area we'd be least inclined to actively return to of our own volition. Most of us have long since exhausted all there is to do there, and it's the place we've known the longest. Most if anything that were to take place there has the highest chance of being written off by the player base as filler. I think the only thing that could potentially revitalize our interest in Mondstadt as a whole would be finding out when the hell Vars is gonna come back with half the entire Genshin universe blazing how much he could 1v9 the game handcuffed and blindfolded. Outside of that, another character we'd all like to see is Klee's mother, Alice, a similarly powerful and enigmatic individual who founded the Hexen Circle and may even be its strongest member. But technically, Alice is not from Mondstadt. She's well known and her daughter presently resides there, but Alice's true origins are not yet known. She might be a character released in a future region or maybe outside of Teyvat, or perhaps never. That leaves us with few if any options for worthwhile and exciting units to consider. And with Genshin Impact's bottom line being the most uncertain it's ever been, they'll have to cook up a grand scheme to revitalize Mondstadt beyond just releasing a new character if they have any hopes of making them successful. Sure, they can always make the unit in question overpowered, but a large portion of Genshin's player base pulls for a character because they like them, or think they're pretty, or handsome, or have a deep story. Now, personally, I believe there's a lot about Mondstadt that can drive up our interest. There's still so much we don't know about Albedo, Kaya, the different families of Mondstadt and such. But to repeat, it's old. Hoyo's the type of developer to do something new than to build on existing material, at least for now. Third theory pertains to balancing character quantity across all the regions. Believe it or not, despite not having gotten a new character since 3.5, second only to the US 21, Mondstadt has the highest number of playable units at 19. While it may appear to be a silly excuse, it's more pragmatic than you might think. Genshin's a game that heavily prides itself on its comprehensive world building. If there's one thing that deserves acknowledgement, it's that they do not spare any expense in their world building. Sure, Nanland stories hit or miss depending on who you ask, but it's a truly ambitious undertaking to condense what is effectively the continents of the world and as much of their collective cultures into a single body of land. Having front-loaded us with Mondstadt characters in version 1, there's not as much of a need to give more. Not yet anyway. Hoyo might be more inclined to make a new unit for Inazuma, Sumeru, or Fontaine than Mondstadt, since they might still be in need of more elemental representatives. Mondstadt has 3 Animo, 5 Cryo, 3 Electro, 2 Geo, 2 Hydro, and 4 Pyro characters. No Tetra yet though, so there's one spot to cover. But for a while they had a pretty big roster. It seems excessive to keep adding to a region that already had a lot to begin with, regardless of their current power level. And on that note, power level may have something to do with that. As the first region of Genshin Impact and one that everyone is obligated to explore, from a balance perspective they might not want to release overpowered units in the first region and would prefer to save the OP characters for Fontaine, Nanland, or any of the later regions you explore just to make players have to check out more of the game. It's the same trick casinos use, where the more time you spend at a casino, the more you'll be tempted to gamble. Likewise, the more time you spend playing Genshin, the more you'll be tempted to swipe. If you have an endgame ready team within the first region, it might have the adverse consequence of removing motivation to play further. Again, we don't know for sure why they don't, it's all speculation. Now, before we end off the video, I want to briefly talk about ways in which Mondstadt can make a return. First, the most important one, Varka's expedition. Prior to the events of the Archon quest, Varka left on a long-term trip with 80% of the Knights of Favoni's faculty. Seeing as he took almost the entire army of Mondstadt with him, we can expect it to be one hell of a big deal. We're not sure when he'll come back, or if maybe instead of him coming back we find him out in Snezhnaya or whatever, but that is one way we can get a lot of new Mondstadt units. We'll certainly get Varka. I seriously doubt Hoyo won't release the character after gassing him up to us all this time, but he might also have taken a number of other high-ranking officials with him who can also be 5-star characters. Not certain if it's gonna be back home or out in the field, as well as if they'll even use ascension materials from Mondstadt, but that's one way to go about it. Second one, the area above Mondstadt. Considering Fontaine is situated further north of it, there's a massive area beyond Storm Terrace Lair and Cider Lake that we can clearly see, which could either be a future potential expansion for the place, or it could be a new region for us to explore. Whichever the case, this can open up the door for a ton of new story developments. Maybe Mondstadt enters a conflict with this northern region, possibly Snezhnaya. Several stories and NPC dialogues hint at Mondstadt's trading hub being the Dornman port, and yet we have no idea where it is. Given the geography of the area, the only place it can logically be in is north of Stormbearer Mountains and or Bright Crown Canyon, so perhaps in version 6 we might stop going west and instead return back to Mondstadt to travel up that way. More expansion means more opportunity to release new characters, possibly even be the watershed moment that leads to Varka's return to Mondstadt. Third one, the sheer amount of planting they've done within Mondstadt. I mentioned earlier that Hoyo might be trying to keep Mondstadt as a boring, uninteresting region to have it serve as a gentle introduction to Genshin Impact. But I don't think new players have even the slightest idea just how many Chekhov's guns are mounted all throughout this godforsaken region. From Albedo foreshadowing him potentially wasting the entire country, to Varka's expedition, to Kaya's mysterious Khaenri'ah origins, to Alice being affiliated with Mondstadt and the founding member of the secret society of OP mages and witches. I don't know about you, but I still think Spiral Abyss has something big to it beyond just being our sole endgame content. There is so much crap they have yet to flesh out with Mondstadt, and I hope they do so sooner than later. Anyway, that about wraps up my discussion for Mondstadt's new characters, or lack thereof. What do you guys think? Do you agree with the theories I posited, or do you think it might be something else? Feel free to share in the comments. That's it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you love to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other video on which characters deserve new forms. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.